Face-to-face meeting with North Korea's chairman Kim Jong-un. The president set to depart the White House at any moment now, en route to a high-stakes summit in Vietnam. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy herself. Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and joining us in the center seat, Chris Wilson is here, Republican strategist and former pollster for the Ted Cruz campaign. Now, when I got all enthusiastic just then, you looked like I hadn't pronounced your name right.
It's Wilson.
Yeah. Oh, it's Wilson.
Oh, traditional pronunciation.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you, too.
You ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Well, this morning, during a gathering of the nation's governors at the White House, the president sounded optimistic that the North Korean regime is willing to give up its nuclear weapons. Watch.
We talk about something that, frankly, he never spoke to anybody about, but we're speaking aloud, and I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization, and I think he'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
Yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo insisted President Trump will not repeat mistakes of the past, and drawing a sharp contrast with the policy of the Obama administration.
Test, pray, and cower has been upended by President Trump. We've put real economic pressure on the North Koreans. We've built out a global coalition. One of the critiques is that we go it alone. We've built out the world's coalition to communicate to Chairman Kim that now is the time, now is the moment, and I hope we'll make real progress on that this week.
But Democratic Senator Ed Markey says there is a risk Kim Jong-un will seek to extract concessions from the president without giving anything up himself. Watch it.
Kim wants to have a personal meeting with Trump with hopes that he can, in fact, elicit concessions from President Trump that otherwise might not be possible if it was just our diplomats talking one-on-one. I think that he has to be very careful going in.
Meanwhile, a former CIA officer involved in high-level diplomacy with North Korea told a group on Friday about an alleged conversation between Secretary Pompeo and Kim Jong-un during Pompeo's visit to North Korea last April. That former CIA officer is claiming Kim Jong-un privately told Pompeo that he did not want his children to live with the burden of nuclear weapons. We bring it out to the couch. Chris, what would the significance of that be in terms of what we're trying to accomplish?
Well, listen to Markley. You know, here in the same generation of failed diplomacy advocates now criticize what the president is doing is a little bit tiresome to hear. I think what Donald Trump has been able to accomplish in a short period of time with sort of his aggressive brand of diplomacy is more than they had in their entire time under President Obama, and really going back almost for the last generation. Now, whether he's able to actually ever achieve anything or complete denuclearization remains to be seen. And frankly, it would be remarkable if he were, because the Kims don't care about anything other than enslaving their people and holding on power. But if they are able to take us a step further toward true denuclearization, and what they've already accomplished, I think, is significant in that category. It is frustrating for me to hear the Ed Markleys of the world continue to lob in criticism bombs whenever we're looking. We've actually moved further in the short period of time.
So what do you make of the former official from the CIA saying that Pompeo and Kim Jong-un supposedly had this conversation? None of us was in the room, so we can't quantify that. But that leader of North Korea didn't want to see his kids grow up in a world where nukes are.
Well, I would say it's encouraging if you do have North Korean leaders recognizing that the way in which their country has been developing, the fact that they were continuing to test nuclear weapons, probably doesn't bode well for the future of their children's future and growing up in a world that is nuclear free. That is positive, because it means there is at least the opportunity for us to be successful in achieving a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
So I thought it was interesting that it was put this way: test, pray, and cower was how we've always sort of seen the other side deal with this, Kennedy.
And I think that was a progression throughout various administrations, really starting with Bill Clinton, who set just a horrible tone for our diplomacy with North Korea. President Obama said when he left office that was the gravest threat posed to the United States and to the world, was a nuclearized North Korea. And I think the fact that this administration has taken a completely different tack is better for the United States, and it certainly is better for peace. Now, Kim Jong-un talking about how he doesn't want his kids entrapped further in a world where they're held hostage by the necessity for nuclear weapons. I think the harder task denuclearization is one thing. Yes, that's difficult. It takes a great deal of diplomacy, and it's very complex. What's harder is freeing those people, perhaps millions of people enslaved in labor camps in North Korea, and really allowing a level of freedom
for him because he's got hardliners within his own country.
And that's really what caused the country to fall apart and cause a revolution from within. If people finally get a taste of freedom, we're not just talking about people who are experiencing economic immobility, but people who are truly being held against their will in some of the most dire circumstances on earth.
Yeah, and when you pick places like Singapore and Hanoi to let some of the leadership taste, even for them, I mean, they're coming to it in trains with no windows, so they too don't have any freedom, really, technically, but not like what you're talking about with those people. So the president tweeted this today. So funny to watch people who have failed for years. They got nothing telling me how to negotiate with North Korea, but thanks anyway. A lot of Democrats, Jessica, are critical of where the president is in going forward with this.
And a lot of Republicans are as well. John Bolton is probably the most cautious of anyone, certainly.
Well, cautious and criticism are two different things.
Well, there's been implicit criticism. If you even look at Mike Pompeo also sat down with Jake Tapper over the weekend and got into kind of an embarrassing exchange where he said, we want denuclearization. And Jake Tapper said the president said that they aren't a nuclear threat. He said, no, that's not true. And Jake Tapper said that's a direct quote. We had over the weekend, it came out that the president made comments that he would be satisfied with an end to testing. And this morning on Fox and Friends, Brian Kilmeade was pushing back against that and saying that should not be our goal. Denuclearization is the only appropriate goal for this. So when you listen to Senator Markley and some of the more hawkish members of the Republican Party, I think what they're asking for is consistency on this and to ensure that no matter how these meetings go down, that we know clearly what America is after and what we will settle for, and that the rest of it is unacceptable.
Talk to me about the economics of this, because changing their worldview is kind of what's happening.
So that's interesting because when you look at other regimes and despotic regimes around the world, you can see that they're motivated by one of two things. You either have the ones that are motivated by wanting to hold on to power and have money, and then there are others that, believe they've been destined by God to obliterate everybody else who doesn't agree with them. Obviously, that's a harder group of people to deal with. So when you look at Kim Jong-un or even Putin, these are people where money means something to them and helps them with their ability to hang on to power. So bringing him to Hanoi is very interesting because it's like, here's a government structure that we don't agree with, but we are able to trade with them and they are able to be prosperous. You don't have to be a democracy. And I think Kennedy makes a great point that the real problem is how does he hold on to power and hold on to his grip with his own people and give them a little bit of freedom and give up the nukes. It's going to be very hard, but he has to feel like that's a possibility to start down the road of, number one, not threatening people with nuclear weapons, then number two, after that,
more than
then turn to the humanitarian situation in his own country. But to everyone who says that we haven't gotten anything so far, Ari Fleischer made a great point earlier today. They have to test those ballistic missiles in order to be able to use them to hit us. Yeah. So selfishly, we were talking about how that missile could hit Hawaii. And now that's not the case because they're not testing those. So I know that's not nice for anyone else who's in the neighborhood, but it's inaccurate to say that nothing's been achieved because Americans are safer. We want that for everyone else, but that's just a point to be made.
No, it's very true. And what you were saying about the humanitarian situation over there, Kennedy, we haven't been able to impact. In fact, we haven't been able to put much pressure on China. But Hanoi, Vietnam, in a place where the Chinese would like to move into those seas as well. I mean, and then you see a deal potentially, not to go down too much on the business network side of this, but it's important because it's all the same story.
And when you look at Vietnam's economy, because it had completely collapsed when they went to an isolated communistic system. And then when they finally opened up their markets and became trading partners with the West and with the United States, you've seen a much healthier economy. And I think it's interesting because Singapore is still very authoritarian, and that's more of a model for Kim Jong-un. But Vietnam shows the fruits of free economy and global trade.
All right, the House expected to vote tomorrow on a resolution that would do away with President Trump's emergency declaration on the border. The measure likely to pass with Democratic support and could also pass the Senate with some GOP support. Missouri's Roy Blunt is one of those who could buck the president. Right now, he hasn't made up his mind.
I don't know yet. I don't like the process. I don't think that the emergency declaration law was written to deal with things that the president asked the Congress to do and then the Congress didn't do. It's never been used that way before. I want to look carefully at the law. I want to hear what the president's lawyers have to say about it.
But even if the measure lands on the president's desk, he has promised a veto, and lawmakers skeptical they would have the votes to override it. House Republican Adam Kinzinger recently got back from the Air National Guard deployment to the border, and he says the president is right about the situation down there. Watch.
I support the emergency declaration because when I went out there, there's a lot of immigration issues. We saw a lot of groups coming across the border illegally, but we saw a lot of drugs. We saw a lot of human trafficking. I've seen it. By the way, I've done 3 prior border deployments, all under President Obama. Okay, so it was never controversial under President Obama. If this was just an immigration issue, I probably would also agree it doesn't rise to the level of an emergency declaration. But this is drugs. This is human trafficking.
Meantime, nearly 24 former congressional Republicans and a bipartisan group of 58 former national security officials have come out against the president's declaration. And Chris, I'll start with you. What's interesting to me when you watch this come to the floor and you watch the vote counting, I haven't heard Nancy Pelosi ask for anything for the Dreamers in a really long time. I haven't heard her advocate on behalf of people. I'm only hearing the Democrats say no to what they won't do and what they're against. It feels like people have gotten forgotten in this, especially the Dreamers.
Well, it is, and this is nothing more than a stunt. And in the grand tradition of legislative stunt votes, it's not going to mean anything at the end of the day, because you mentioned even if it goes to the president, which is unlikely, he's going to veto it. But I'll tell you, my concern as someone who works for Republicans is what this does do, and I really wish every one of these Republicans that's going to vote against the president would sit down and listen to what Adam Kinzinger said this morning on Fox, is because it puts a lot of Republicans on the Senate, in which they are defending some blue to purple to blue type areas, on the wrong side of an issue that is not going to go well in their state. And frankly, it's a lot of people on our side, on the Republican side, setting up their colleagues to be in tougher situations to win re-election.
Jessica, I bet you disagree with that.
I don't. Purple states and counties are difficult for both sides here. I mean, the same goes for Democrats that are in more conservative districts who have to talk differently about border security than they do in, New York City. Like Jerry Nadler can say whatever he wants about it up here, but it makes a difference if you're down there. Kristen Sinema is indicative of that. She voted with the president over 50% of the time, actually, when she was in Congress. So it is difficult. But then there are Republicans like Will Hurd, whose constituency has a huge chunk of the border that we're talking about right here. And he says we don't need a wall. The problem has always been that the president made up an emergency when things got really bleak for him. He talked about it consistently through the first 2 years in the campaign, but then he suddenly got to a boiling point and said it's a national emergency, when yes, there are drugs coming, but they're going through points of entry, which means we have people there that are stopping them. The numbers do not bear out his argument that this is an emergency. If you look at Border Patrol statistics, the numbers are going down over the last 2 decades. So when he gets up in the Rose Garden and he says, I didn't need to do this, but people are going to be skeptical and they don't want to set a bad precedent.
Don't we only know that they're going through the ports of entry because they're able to stop them there and we have people there, but the ones that are going in everywhere else,
but we don't have
know
that.
About
we
it.
don't have, Sarah Sanders with Chris Wallace got schooled on that.
Well, the
about
president today, though, had a
the
different take on that. He was saying that there are areas that are outside.
The president and I always have a different take.
Well, you can have a different take with the president, but we've also seen recently members of Congress down there eyeing it for themselves as well. Kinzinger is the only one that I know of who's deployed recently, but we've had congressional delegates go down there as well. So the point that I would make is it good enough just to protect those areas where we say ports of entry where we can keep up with it?
I think the difference is ports of entry versus national emergency. You can have a conversation about border security, but we're talking about declaring a national emergency, and that is the issue.
But if you listen to what Kinzinger described, what part of that do you not believe is an emergency?
Kennedy,
go ahead, Kennedy.
I could do it, but I want to make sure Kennedy gets in.
I don't understand why you've got 2 different groups of people who go to 2 different parts of the border and see 2 completely different things. What I would like to see is both of them swap and see if there's any consistency with their reporting back of what's happening at the border, or if this is just a series of confirmation biases, which in that case, the whole thing is essentially a fraud and we're not getting the truth from anyone. If you want to know why drug cartels send drugs through ports of entry, you have to go back and read some of the testimony from the El Chapo trial, because he was the largest exporter of drugs into our country.
Point.
And they said that they went to these legal ports of entry because they could get a lot more drugs through those points.
In a big vehicle. There you go.
Submarines,
all right.
tankers.
Comedian Bill Maher mocking people in red states as being less educated and earning less money than people in blue states. Whether that kind of elitism bodes badly for Democrats in 2020. Plus, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff vows to subpoena the Mueller report if the DOJ doesn't make it public. Whether this is all about Russia or if Democrats have a larger agenda, we'll debate.
There's never been a witness who's alleged conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, and yet Adam Schiff, that three-eyed raven, Adam Schiff, who can see things nobody else can see.
President to arrive soon on Marine One and board Air Force One. He is on his way. He's going to ride by motorcade, en route to Hanoi, Vietnam, for those talks with Kim Jong-un. We expect him to maybe make a comment or two. We're not sure. You never know.
Well, he always does that with
Marine
One, but we know here on the East Coast, these winds are vicious right now, right?
That's
you can
true.
hear them in the studio.
That's true, but remember when he got out of the motorcade and he went over to the sidelines before? He's done that.
Yeah, he sometimes will do it. We don't know,
we'll
but
see.
We're on it.
All right, thank you. We'll bring it to you live when it happens.
A top Democrat in Congress is saying he's ready to haul Robert Mueller before his committee if the special counsel is not sufficiently forthcoming with the results of his investigation of the president. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff spoke yesterday, insisting there is evidence that President Trump colluded with Russia. Collusion's not a crime. And vowing to make sure the entire special counsel report is made public, even if new Attorney General William Barr withholds some information. Watch.
We will obviously subpoena the report. We will bring Bob Mueller in to testify before Congress. We will take it to court if necessary. And in the end, I think the department understands they're going to have to make this public. I think Barr will ultimately understand that as well. If he were to try to withhold, to try to bury any part of this report, that will be his legacy, and it will be a tarnished legacy. So I think there will be immense pressure not only on the department but on the Attorney General to be forthcoming.
Former Republican House Oversight Chair Trey Gowdy with Game of Thrones reference, telling Maria Bartiromo on Sunday Morning Futures that Chairman Schiff apparently sees evidence no one else can.
There's never been a witness who's alleged conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, and yet Adam Schiff, that three-eyed raven, Adam Schiff, who can see things nobody else can see, says he has evidence more than circumstantial, not quite direct. By the way, for those who didn't go to law school, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as evidence that is not circumstantial or direct. But Adam has seen it, and he's never pressed on it.
Meanwhile, Attorney General William Barr said in his confirmation hearing he would be as transparent as possible with the Mueller report, and there is precedent involved here, as the Justice Department has released everything Republicans requested in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. DOJ also released the Starr report and Leon Jaworski's Watergate investigation. Chris, where are we going here?
Oh, gosh. You know, Adam Schiff, the leading light of Russian conspiracy theories, was always going to release every single word of this that fits his theory as to what happened. And any part that's classified that he's not allowed to release or would be illegal to release, he'll leak to the Washington Post or the New York Times. That was always going to happen, and it shouldn't surprise anyone. He's been doing the same thing since the beginning of this, and he's always been kind of been a rogue out there. And unfortunately, I don't know what the Trey Gowdy's references means, so someone will have to explain those to me about the Game of Thrones reference. But from a standpoint of what Schiff is going to do, what he believes fits his narrative, and it doesn't matter what the evidence shows.
So is that your opinion? Because you said, well, he's done it before.
Yeah, he has. I think you can look back since the beginning of this process. Adam Schiff has been the one who's been leaking what's been going on, and anything that's made its way out, which has been pretty tight. I mean, you got to give the Mueller team credit in terms of keeping things close to their vest. So anything that...
Well, that's why he has bipartisan support.
That's right. You're exactly right.
Schiff is going to be so mad if that report is tepid.
Well, some Democrats have already talked about what they're going to do if it's not quite there. In the meantime, I'll tell you what is there. The president is at Joint Base Andrews getting ready. Do you hear that wind?
Yeah.
You can hear it. That's
right
why they're
that.
in a motorcade. It usually takes Marine One to get there, to Air Force One. But it's very windy conditions for that type of craft, I would imagine. So they made a call to be on the ground. And so here we are. And we are waiting for the president to leave for a history-making summit. Look, the first one was with the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. And now we're looking at a second summit with the President of the United States and Kim Jong-un. And what will be achieved from this? Denuclearization has been the goal, and there has been some criticism, you may be seeing that, about the special envoy that we have with North Korea right now. Some are critical that we may be giving too much away in terms of sitting down and having this much conversation with a brutal regime. But as Kennedy was pointing out a while ago, they've got upwards of millions of people in custody, human rights situations in that country. And there is the President of the United States as he boards Air Force One. How much of a difference can our president make? Well, it's already changing in the sense of we are talking with that country. Melissa?
It's interesting to put it in perspective of how the American people are feeling about this as we watch the president get aboard the plane. Recent Fox News poll, President Trump on North Korea approve or disapprove his policy so far. 46% approve, 41% do not approve. U.S. taking military action to stop North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Right now, 49% in favor of military action to stop the program, 37% oppose it. Now, that number is down a little bit from April. It was at 53. But, Chris, to me, that says that, you know, people feel threatened. They feel concerned about this risk out there.
Well, they feel threatened and concerned, but the bigger aspect of it is they're willing to do something about it. And I think that's the unique aspect of the numbers you pointed out, because you could look at our relationship with other countries. Or if you were to look, for instance, at Venezuela today, I think you could argue that there is a national threat to us coming out of South America, but at the same time, you don't see those same sort of support for taking action against them or even intervening in the current situation there. And that, to me, what's interesting about it, because you do have, I mean, right now, you've got to put everything that goes on, and it's somewhat cynical, but this is what I do for a living. You've got to put all of it into the prism of what does it mean for a re-election. And if the president is able to come out of North Korea, or he's able to make a claim that he has somehow taken us further down the road to a denuclearized North Korean peninsula, if he's able to push Kim further along in the process of lightening up on his people, then that is a positive for him, and I think that's a big deal.
Kennedy, I want to get in with this point because I had mentioned it loosely. And again, the president is aboard Air Force One, leaving shortly for Hanoi, Vietnam. It's about a 20-hour plane ride normally commercially. I'm going to think that they might be able to get there a little bit quicker, but we'll see. We'll be covering it every length of the way here. A senior administration official tells Fox News the White House, State Department, DOD, Treasury, even Energy are expressing concern about President Trump's special envoy to North Korea, Stephen Belgum. Is he going to, and this is a quote, getting too far over his skis with negotiations with North Korean officials? So even going into this summit, there is some reported criticism per a senior administration official talking with Fox News. Kennedy, what do you make of it?
I don't think that these talks are implicitly harmful. Of course, I would like to know that the president has a solid agenda and is incredibly focused on extracting something that is not only to our benefit, but makes the world a better, more peaceful place. And the more talks we have and the more we lean on the side of trade and having goods move back and forth, the less you see a military threat. And, you know, the one thing that North Korea is asking for is for the United States to ease up on their alliance with South Korea, doing military exercises in their backyard. And the president has said that, you know, perhaps we have too many military bases open all over the world. And, the one good thing about his presidency, you could say, is the unorthodox strategery.
Well, and he's been talking about it since the campaign trail, you know, that idea of what makes us better and deployment and all the such. You know, he's had an interesting morning talking Chinese trade. It's had a positive effect on the Dow Jones. This president making news, having a positive effect, if you will, in terms of talking with Chinese leadership as he gets ready to take off for Hanoi, Vietnam. Air Force One, center of your screen, we're covering it, and we'll come right back to it. We're going to take a quick break, though. Virginia's Democratic Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax is facing new controversy today over his latest response to the sexual assault allegations against him. Critics say his rhetoric crossed the line. Details ahead. The gloves come off here, though. Democrats face a growing split over the Green New Deal pushed by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now that freshman Democrat is ripping Senator Dianne Feinstein for her comments. Really, it was a lecture to young students about the progressive proposal. The impact of it all. We'll debate it. Stay close.
I know what I'm doing. You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway.